Home is where the heart is. We've heard that before. And I want to say clearly that the human being, not only do we have a physical home, which is made up of, for some of us, a loving home is where the heart is, but I want to say this clearly, that as a human, as the created, our first home rests right in the heart of God. And before our parents knew us, God knew us. Before our parents loved us or failed to love us, God loved us. And we are meant for a vibrant, active relationship with God. That you can be physically homeless and still at home with a fully satisfied heart and soul in a deep relationship with God. And you can be in the nicest, most beautiful house in the Oakland Hills and actually be homeless without a home, lost and wandering in a deep, dark place of your own soul. I want to talk to us about coming home. The invitation today is going to be to come home. There are some of us in here who are convinced deep down in our souls that we are not good enough, that we are too broken, that our life is too messed up, that we have done too many things, that we have been in too many ugly, dark places and done too much, that we are broken beyond repair. We've become convinced of that. And not only do we feel like maybe we're broken just this one time, that God would have forgiven me one time, I could come home one time, but we've forgotten the reality that we're so broken and so addictive and so stuck in that space that we can actually come home every time. There are some of us here who are convinced that we can no longer come home. We've walked away from this deep, meaningful relationship with God. We've walked away from our Father, from God, Father and Mother, all combined in that. And there are some of us who are convinced that we are too good. We don't need to come home. We have bestowed upon ourselves a sense of righteousness based on our performance. We have followed all the rules and have forgotten a deep relationship with the ruler. We've begun slightly, overtly, or explicitly to look down on others who just don't get it, who don't understand, who aren't woke enough, or have the right theology or the right space, that we know something that they don't, that somehow we are better than they are because we have been slaving and working and following these lists of commands and dutiful places that allows us to look down on someone else who doesn't have as many Jesus points. If you're keeping Jesus' score, this might be for you. Some of us who think that we're not good enough, there's some of us who think that we are too good. I want to tell a story. There was a man, an immigrant man, who came to this country a long time ago for me. I'm a little bit younger, and he came from a place where there was a cultural value of family, a deep cultural value of family. And he came here with absolutely nothing. And little by little, he found work in a place, and he found another work, and then he managed to save up in the middle of all of this, and he managed to save and save and save, and he bought his first house. And then he was able to continue working hard in that place and saving money in all the right ways, and he bought his second house. And he continued along that trend, figuring out how to leverage the first house for the second house, and he fought through all the barriers that held him and tried to hold him in that place, and along the way, he met a beautiful woman, a woman who made him better, a woman who added, a woman who was his equal. And they together began to build. She finished her college career. She became a lawyer. And they bought their first apartment complex. And then they bought their second apartment complex. And they bought their first office building and their second office building. And over the course of the next 10 years, that couple built an incredible portfolio of wealth. They're one of the wealthiest families in Alameda County. And along the way, beyond that, and they would run their business, and she had her time in her career for a while, and then they had children, and not out of responsibility or duty or any of these other factors, but out of sheer choice, she remained to stay home and raise their two daughters. And he always ran his business with excellence. He cared about his employees. He cared about people that were staying in his apartments. He went above and beyond. He paid beyond a living wage. He lived for them. He enjoyed his work. And he gave freely to all those different places. He was someone you would want to work for. The benefit package was well above and beyond. You never had to negotiate. But the light of his life was his family. It was his daughters and his wife. He was that dad that I dream of being, that never missed a game, that never missed a performance, that was there front row, that when he came home in the evening, he would turn off his cell phone, put it in the charger, because there was nothing more important. There was no deal, there was no crisis, there was no phone call, there was nothing to achieve at work. He just wanted to be with his daughters. He ended up in his garage holding a whole file cabinet because he was that dad that kept every single drawing, every single paper, every single project, every single thing. He wasn't the dad like me. This is recorded, so I can't say it. But you know what I do with the stuff. That wasn't him. His life was them. He did as best he could to love them every step of the way, and his joy was to be with them. That was his favorite part, creating these vacations and these adventures and these experiences, and they grew up. The daughters became part of the business. His joy was overwhelming. He said, look, I get to work with, I get to play with, I get to laugh with, I get to serve with, I get to do good with my joys. And these two daughters grew up in that space. There came this powerful, powerful day when he sat them down and dinner around their table at one of the Sunday night dinners because they had their own lives. They were getting older in their 20s. And he pulled out of his pocket 2 rings that he had brought with him. It was the only thing that he brought from the country he came from. They were his grandmother's rings. They were family rings with the family name on the back. He pulled them out of his pocket. He said, I was tempted throughout my whole life to pawn these off, to get more money, to get more income and down payments to do the work, but I never could. And he handed his daughters each one a ring. They put it on their finger. They wore it. Years go by, and he never really knew what happened. But along the way, and we never really get a chance to know either, the younger daughter starts to drift. And family doesn't become as important, and the joy in her face kind of goes away. And things build, and she eventually comes to her dad in this really tragic moment and says to her dad, Dad, I'm done. I don't want to be part of this anymore. And he didn't fully understand why. He had loved her to the best of his ability. I don't know, maybe she felt too trapped. Maybe she felt confined. I don't know what it was. Dad, I don't want to be part of this family anymore. I don't want to be part of this at all. I don't want to be around you. I need to go. He said, what are you asking for? He said, I want you to sell half of all the properties you've owned over these last years. I want you to give me my half now. Cash out all the inheritance, cash out all the pieces. And then she took the ring off her finger and she slid it across the table with an address to where to send the check when it was done. And she turned and she walked out. And the father, being as loving and as graceful as he was, says, go. And goes to work doing it. Selling off half of all the stuff he's owned and he's built. I mean, the elder sister was just aghast. Dad, what are you doing? And he wrote her a check, one final check. It was a massive amount. Because, you all know real estate in the Bay Area. He bought in early. It was a massive check. And she got it, and she took it, and she went to LA, And she lived every part of what we would imagine the American dream to be. She bought the clothes she wanted. She bought the house she wanted. She bought the cars she wanted. She partied with celebrities. Her Instagram was off the hook. Everybody wanted to follow her and be a part of that. It was everything. She could buy whatever she wanted. She invested in some different places, risky investments to keep more money flowing in and more money flowing in and more money flowing in. And for years, she had it set. But then came an economic crash. Amen? And the investments went away. First they came for the house. Then they came for the cars. Then the credit card bills started coming. She would call her financial management. They didn't have any money left. They had shut down. They went broke too. And over the course of the next few years, she went from a process of having everything that we might dream of that would fill your soul in an American, consumeristic, materialistic way. She had the most beautiful home, but was absolutely homeless. Watched it all go away. Bill after bill kept coming, and person after person kept coming. She tried to go to a friend's house, but we all know they really weren't her friends. They just liked to party with her. They weren't going to help her in the middle of this, and if she couldn't fly to the weekend trip to Vegas with them, what's the point of having a relationship? She found herself alone on the streets, Skid Row, with nothing. She managed to find a few odd jobs here and there, but then she ended up getting stuck in a dirty and awful and terrible version of what prostitution might look like in the middle of Skid Row. And as she was walking home one night, just absolutely thrashed, with just these remaining dollars in her pockets. 3 guys beat her up, took the money, left her for dead on the side of the street. She slept there that night as much as she could, with blood pouring down her face and tears and mascara flowing over her eyes, and had a moment and realized, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be like this. What if I returned home? What if I went back to NorCal? What if I returned home? What could I say? What could I do? How could I make this right? What if I just said, Dad, I'm so sorry that I screwed this up. I'm so sorry that I wanted you dead. I'm so sorry that I took my money. Just hire me back in one of your properties. I'll work somewhere far away, but I need something. This isn't working. She came up with this plan. And she got up with the concrete marks kind of were on her face still, and blood kind of dried and crusted in her hair. She smelled like alcohol, and she smelled like the guys she had been with that night. She smelled like the streets, and she smelled unshowered. She smelled terrible. She looked even worse. And she kind of half stumbled and walked with bruises all up in her ribs and legs. And she had just enough 20s saved in her shoe to catch a bus ride back home. And no one would sit by her on the bus. No one would come near her on the bus. The bus driver himself, he had a hard time. She made it back up here, and then little by little, in the course of that day, she stumbled home. And this is what happened there. When she turned around the corner, her parents lived in a wealthy neighborhood. It was a beautiful neighborhood. We know the type, $10 million, $15 million, $20 million homes. She turned the corner, and her father was there waiting on the porch. You see, her dad had never stopped praying, had never stopped searching, had never stopped looking. Her dad was waiting there on the porch. Every morning before he went to work, he would have his coffee out there, just hoping maybe one day she would come home. And every night before he went to bed, he would have a glass of wine out there on the porch, and he would rock back and forth, scanning the street up and down. And this morning, he was in a bathrobe, which you probably wouldn't go down the street in. You know what I mean? Things might, But this morning, when she turned the corner, and he was scanning like he'd done 1,200 mornings before, he looked. Maybe. Another sip of coffee. And his heart skipped like 4 beats. Could it be? And he instantly tied that robe a little bit tighter, and he took off down the street. She was about 75 yards away, maybe a little bit longer than the distance of this place, and he ran. And as he got closer, he could see that it was his daughter. It was the one who kept all her stuff. It was the one who did the performances. It was his daughter. And he ran right through the smell. He ran right through the blood. He ran right through the tears. He ran right through the mascara. He ran right through the bruises. He ran right through the trauma. He ran right through all the feelings that could have been in himself. And maybe you're a dad thinking to yourself, if my daughter would have done that, I'd be angry. He ran right through it all, and he grabbed her, and he bear hugged her, and he couldn't stop kissing her. My daughter was gone on an overnight sleepover, and I felt the same way. And he couldn't stop. It didn't matter that there was blood. It didn't matter that it smelled bad. It didn't matter any of that stuff. It didn't matter it was getting all over him. It didn't matter what the neighbors said. None of that mattered. His daughter was home. She was lost, and now she's found. She was dead. He thought she must be dead, and now she's here. That's how God feels about you. And they start throwing this big party. He starts calling everybody he knows. He calls the caterer. He calls the band. He calls the people that do rental stuff. He says, look, tonight, we're throwing the biggest party the world has ever seen in my backyard. There'll be no expense spared. And all the place turns into this world. Somebody calls his wife, and his wife comes running out, and it's the same experience again, all hugging and kissing and finding all these different places. And he tries to call the elder sister. But her phone won't answer. It keeps going to voicemail, and it keeps going to voicemail, and it keeps going to voicemail. And they throw the party, and the party is happening that night. They get the daughter inside. They get her cleaned up. They give her some new set of clothes. She's crying. They're crying. All of that is happening at the same time. And the elder daughter comes home. See, she had bought a house just right next door in the $10 million family home area. And she pulls up, and she looks, and she sees literally like strobe lights, and she hears the Beatles playing in the background. And she's like, what is happening? She can smell the food from the place. I mean, they must have spent $400,000, $500,000 on that party in the back. And the elder daughter pulls up, and she asked one of the workers who was carrying more wine in, and she saw the wine. It was really good wine. She said, what is happening? And the worker couldn't stop smiling. The party was so good. The celebration was so good. And the worker couldn't stop smiling. And I think smiling about a moment that maybe the worker never saw. Right before the party, Mom and Dad walked into youngest daughter's room. She'd been cleaned up, and she was still rehearsing her speech. Father, I'm so sorry. I've sinned against you. I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against... He says, hold out your hand. She held out her hand, and he had in his pocket the same family ring that he'd given her before, that he had slid across the table. He put it on her finger, still tears, whispered into her ear, welcome home. I love you, and I always have, and I always will. Welcome home, my daughter. So the servant outside can't stop smiling, can't stop the joy. It's not the same on the elder sister's face. The elder sister is pissed off. What? I think maybe partly because she realized he just spent $400,000 of my inheritance on her. Maybe you older siblings were like, mm-hmm. And so she's out front, pacing back and forth in that same porch where the father was waiting for the other one, refusing to come into the party. Someone tell my dad that I am not coming into that party. Eventually it gets word to dad, who was in the middle of some kind of, if you're from, I don't know, maybe some kind of cha-cha slide. Maybe he was dancing with mom. But he was in the middle of a celebration. And he gets called out by the elder daughter. And they have this moment, their moment on the porch. The elder daughter became so angry she couldn't even go in. She just fumed. And everyone saw the dad leave from the party. They knew something was up, otherwise he would never leave. They have this conversation out front. Father begins with, says, daughter, come in. Let's celebrate. Let's dance. Your sister is home. She's home. She's back. She was lost, she's found, she was dead, she's alive. This is a chance to celebrate. Aren't you happy? Where's your joy? And she was joyless. Living in a $10 million home next door, she was homeless. Just like many of us. She said, no. All these years, I have been slaving for you. I've been running your business. I've been doing what you asked me to do. No question, no matter what. Always responsible, always obedient, following every rule. And your daughter comes home after wishing you were dead, throwing your ring at you, spending all your money on whatever that you earned, ending up prostituting herself out, comes home, and you do this? I'm not going in there. I think what happens to us, what happened to the elder daughter, is that she respected some kind of return for her service. She expected, she was performing. She thought she was so good that she'd forgotten that the joy of being with the Father, just for itself. And that's what the Father says. With tears again, I think that the father realized in that moment that he had found one daughter and lost another. With tears again, the father reaches for his daughter, his elder daughter, to try and embrace her, and she gives him the Heisman and says, no way, don't come near me. And he says to her with the biggest love possible in his face, with a compassion that comes from deep in here, and says, daughter, you have always been with me. Always. Everything I have is yours. Everything. All the parties you want. I've always been with you and you with me. Everything I have is yours. We don't know in the end of that story if the daughter comes in or not, the elder one. We don't know if she chooses to leave. We don't know if she chooses to come in and celebrate. You don't get to know that. We do get to know this, that to those of us who think we're not good enough, that story says, who think we're like the younger daughter in one way, shape, or form, that story says, come home. What's waiting for you is a ring and a party and a celebration. No matter how many times you leave, of course you're good enough. God loves you just the way you are. What we do know is that an invitation goes out to the eldest daughter. Come in. Everything I have is yours. Come home. Don't love me and follow me and work with me out of duty or obedience that's not love-driven, out of some kind of shame or guilt or responsibility or should. Do it with me because you love me and you know that everything I have is yours. I do know that that invitation goes out to you too, whether you feel like the younger daughter or the eldest daughter. The invitation is to come home today. And last little piece, that we are all, as followers of Jesus, we're all asked at some point in our lives to mature and to grow and to be transformed into loving people the way the Father does. Into loving people the way the Father does. Amen? So this week, I hope you take the invitation to come home. Take 2 minutes each day. Just allow your heart to come home to a God who loves you, who died for you, who rose again for you, who runs to you, whether you're on the porch angry about coming in or whether you've been in the streets of LA. And allow God to transform you into being the Father who invites in the first place, invites others to come home. Amen? Let's sing and worship Him.